There are people who walk into a room without making a sound, yet they see everything. They read emotions through eyes, remember the smallest details others unintentionally overlook, and show up exactly when you need them, as if understand you better than you understand yourself. But the paradox is this: the more they understand others, the more distance they keep. Not because they are cold, but because they have learned a very costly lesson. Trust is not always safe. Behind those who trust no one is not arrogance or mere suspicion, but a complex psychological mechanism shaped by experience, pain, and an unusually deep observation of human nature. And the truth about them might make you reflect on yourself. If you've ever found it hard to open up or see yourself in this story, stay until the end of the video, because what you're about to hear might change how you understand trust forever. Don't forget to subscribe and follow the channel to explore more deep psychological truths. What makes this story profound lies not in what others can see, but in what is constantly unfolding quietly within. A person who doesn't trust is not always closed off or distant. On the contrary, they are often remarkably skilled at making others feel safe. They listen carefully, respond at the right moments, and adjust themselves to fit each situation. But within that flexibility lies a protective strategy. They control distance with precision, close enough to connect, but never close enough to be hurt. To understand this, we need to look deeper into how trust is formed. Trust is not simply a rational choice, but a biological response programmed from an early age. When a child grows up in an environment where safety and danger are intertwined, their nervous system does not learn how to relax in relationships. Instead, it learns to stay alert. It remembers that love can come with pain, that closeness can lead to hurt. Over time, these experiences are no longer just fragmented memories, but become an internal map that guides all future reactions. That is why when they enter a new relationship, they do not start from zero. They carry with them an entire predictive system reinforced over years. Every glance, every silence, every subtle shift in someone's tone can be interpreted as a warning signal. What's important is that these predictions often occur faster than conscious thought. Before they can think logically, their body has already reacted. Their heart beats faster, their mind becomes tense, and an urgent need arises to find what might be wrong before it's too late. This is where the inner conflict becomes most evident, because alongside that vigilance is a deeply human need to connect, to be understood, to be loved. People who struggle with trust are not lacking the ability to love, they lack the feeling of safety in loving. They can feel very deeply, sometimes even more deeply than others, but that very depth makes them more vulnerable. And when you have experienced pain that you couldn't control, putting yourself in a vulnerable position again becomes an enormous risk. This leads to behaviors that can easily be misunderstood from the outside. At times, they may become distant, just as things are going well, not because they don't care, but because intimacy begins to trigger old memories, memories tied to being hurt after trusting. At other times, they may become overly sensitive to small changes, ask more questions than necessary, or check for consistency in others' behavior. Not because they want to control, but because they're trying to protect themselves from a scenario they believe will eventually repeat. An often overlooked but crucial aspect is the loss of trust in oneself. When someone grows up in an environment where their emotions and perceptions are frequently dismissed, being told they are too sensitive, overthinking, or misunderstanding things, they gradually learn to doubt their own feelings. And when you can no longer trust your own intuition, the world becomes far more unpredictable. You don't just fear that others might hurt you, you also fear that you might not recognize it in time. The result is a constant state between two extremes, being wary of others while also uncertain about oneself. They may be highly attuned to subtle cues in their environment, but immediately question the accuracy of what they perceive. This creates an exhausting loop where every decision feels heavy, every emotion is overanalyzed, and a sense of peace is almost absent in relationships. However, it's important to understand that none of this is a personality flaw in a negative sense. These are adaptive mechanisms, ways the mind and body have learned to survive in unsafe environments. The behaviors others might see as confusing or contradictory are actually the result of an overactive but understandable protective system. And that is why, when someone like this chooses to trust, it is not a small act. It is a gradual process built through repeated experiences of safety, consistency, and respect. They do not give trust easily, but when they do, they often do so with deep commitment. Because for them, trust is not just an emotion, it is a risk, a choice, and sometimes a leap into the unknown. Understanding this not only helps you see others more compassionately, but also allows you to reflect on yourself if you recognize your own story in this. Because behind the doubt is not a deficiency, but a history. And when you begin to see that history more clearly, you also begin to have the opportunity to rewrite how you connect with the world, not by forcing yourself to trust, but by gradually creating experiences safe enough for trust to naturally form again. There is a truth that is not easy to accept. For those who have become accustomed to being betrayed, promises almost lose their value, not because they are pessimistic, but because experience has taught them that words and actions can exist as two completely separate worlds. They have heard beautiful things before, reassurances, commitments, words that made them believe this time would be different. But reality unfolded in a familiar pattern, and over time, their brain learned something very clearly. Don't trust what is said, observe what actually happens. That is why what can begin to change them is not grand promises, but small, consistent evidence. This is where the concept of built safety becomes important. It is not a breakthrough moment, but an accumulative process where someone consistently shows up in the same way, not only when things are going well, but also on ordinary days, like in moments where there is nothing special to prove. It is when someone keeps their word even when no one is watching, when they respond in a stable way, not fluctuating with temporary emotions, when they don't just seem trustworthy, but actually become trustworthy over time. This may sound simple, but for a nervous system that is used to instability, this is an entirely new signal. At first, it will not be accepted immediately. In fact, it is often questioned. The person may wonder, is this real, or when will things change? Because in their past, consistency was often temporary, a phase before everything collapsed. So instead of relaxing, they continue to observe, to test, to wait for a familiar sign of disappointment. And this is exactly where many relationships begin to struggle. From the outside, this hesitation can be misunderstood as a lack of trust or appreciation. But from the inside, it is a protective mechanism trying to verify whether this time is truly different. Each consistent action is like a new data point added to the system, but that system does not update immediately. It needs time to accumulate enough evidence before it dares to change a conclusion that has existed for years. This process, as mentioned, happens very slowly, and more importantly, it does not happen in a straight line. There will be moments when the person begins to open up, sharing more, trusting more, allowing themselves to feel the closeness they once avoided. But right after that, there may be an unexpected withdrawal, a silence, a confusing distance. Not because they no longer care, but because an old part of them is being activated, reminding them that safety may only be temporary. These moments are often mistaken as regression, but in reality, they are signs that change is taking place. When an old structure, a belief that has existed for so long, begins to be challenged, it does not disappear immediately. It resists. It rechecks. It tries to return to what is familiar, because even if it is painful, the familiar still feels safer than the unknown. What matters here is not to completely avoid those moments of withdrawal, but how they are handled. If the environment remains stable without overreacting, without leaving, without punishment, then the nervous system gradually learns something new. That closeness does not necessarily lead to loss. That relationships can exist where you do not always have to be on guard. And if you are someone who sees yourself in this story, perhaps the most important part is not about needing to change immediately, but about how you view what you have been through. The walls you built are not signs of weakness, but evidence of adaptation. You learned how to protect yourself in situations where not doing so could have hurt you even more deeply. And in a way, that is an achievement. But like any system built to survive in a specific environment, there comes a time when you need to ask yourself, are all those walls still necessary? not to tear them down immediately, but to begin distinguishing what is still protecting you and what is preventing you from experiencing something better. This process is not clear, not fast, and sometimes will make you feel uncertain. But within that uncertainty, a new possibility begins to emerge: the ability to choose how you respond rather than simply repeating what you have learned. And step by step, through small but real experiences, trust is no longer a distant concept, but something that can be rebuilt, not based on promises, but on reality that you can feel and verify. If these words resonate with you, give yourself time, not to become a better version by some standard, but to gradually feel safer within your own experience. And if you want to continue exploring deeper perspectives on psychology, human behavior, and how we form trust, follow this journey. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you'd like to support this kind of in depth content, you can join us. Your presence and support not only help sustain the content, but also contribute to creating a space where stories like this can be told with honesty and depth.